why should we care about our brain health?
Studies have been done where you measure biological markers of stress, like cortisol and something called DHEA. And under circumstances, so there was some studies done by Alia Crum and maybe about a decade or more ago. And basically what she did was told people they were going to go into an interview, a really stressful interview. And before the interview, some of those people watched a video that showed the positive enhancing effects of stress. One of the things that I can recommend to people that have a busy mind or lots of worries that come in that they find distracting is to allocate a time, an appointment with yourself, and I call it a worry window.
Can we actually influence the brain health as we get older?
But we also know that in the brain, aerobic exercise produces something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a growth factor. This is a molecule that nourishes and nurtures the health of our neurons, especially those around the hippocampus, which is involved in memory.
Is there any diet that can nourish our brain?
I was in clinic with a psychiatrist and he did have a patient, a young-ish patient, and they'd done the scan and they actually had atrophy, so shrinkage of the brain, and that was attributed to.
The birth of this podcast is deeply personal. I've poured out countless hours into finding the right guests, shaping each conversation, and crafting every episode with intention. My drive comes from a live experience, from pain, resilience, and a desire to make a difference. By subscribing, you're not just supporting a podcast, you're helping grow a community, built on healing, honesty, and real impact. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the episode. Thank you.
If you have gotten this far in this series, that means you're as anxious as I am to find out what can we do to help our brain. With that said, I won't keep you waiting, so let's get into the episode. Dr. Tracy, how are you doing?
Really well, thank you. How are you?
I'm fine. We are anxious to hear what we can do to help the brain, and you have a lot of information in store for us.
I hope so.
Are you ready for it?
I am indeed.
Okay, let us pray as we start. O most and righteous eternal Father, take full control of this podcast, forgive us of our sins, and bless our listeners in Jesus' name. Amen. Let's get into it. After talking about anxiety, ADHD, and dementia, what do they all have in common at a brain level?
Brilliant question. So let's just talk very briefly about the difference between them. And for anyone that's not listened to the previous podcast, they may want to go back just to reinforce those differences. So anxiety is related to mental health, very much driven by a stress response. Alzheimer's is neurodegenerative, so we'd see decline in the brain function. And ADHD, this is to do with the development of the brain, development of neural circuitry. In terms of commonality, something that's very, very close to my heart and is often not talked about enough in relation to anxiety, ADHD, and, for example, the dementias, I want to talk about their sensitivity to stress. Let's face it, life is incredibly stressful. Modern day life is stressful. We cannot avoid stress, and people don't realize the impact that stress can actually have. So, for example, as I said just a minute ago, anxiety, this is very much stress dominant. Okay, the dementias, including Alzheimer's that I alluded to, we know that chronic stress and also an inflammatory environment can increase our risk of developing one of the dementias. Remember, in the podcast, I talked about dementia as being an umbrella term, and what comes underneath that would be things like Alzheimer's disease, Lewy body dementia, etc. And something that people may not know is actually chronic stress really antagonizes the presentations of ADHD. So although these are very different,
Mm-hmm.
commonality is how stress positions itself in relation to dementia, anxiety, and ADHD.
Okay. So, but why should we care about our brain health?
Okay, well, if you think about it, your brain is in charge of everything else. Your brain is in charge of your the gut processes, bladder processes, heart, lungs. We absolutely should care about our brain. The problem is we can't see it so easily. It's also very difficult to diagnose. You know, if we've got a heart concern, we can see that in scans or various tests that can be done. Unfortunately, with the brain, it's not the same. And so people wait until there's a problem before they start looking at tackling this. I mean, this is very general across the population anyway, in relation to our health, isn't it? You know, we think to ourselves, well, I think I'm okay, until such time as maybe the doctor says, but you're not okay.
Mm-hmm.
And I think with the brain, you know, when we're talking about just life in general being so stressful, this is almost like a silent process that happens, but it has a huge knock-on effect. And why should we care? Well, like I said, we need to be taking, if we are stressed, for example, we need to remember that that has an impact on our hearts. Chronic stress can increase our risk of some cancers. You know, so it has a huge impact. You know, the brain and the body really, or some people will say the mind and the body, they can't be separated. And we think about our health in terms of our body. We need to really pay attention and be more considered around our brain health and our mental health.
At the start, you said that we can't avoid stress because the world that we're living in is stressful.
Mm.
But there must something that we can do to really help us. If stress is such a contributing factor to so many diseases, how can we alleviate the stress or to minimize it to the point where it do not affect us?
Okay. And this actually is a really powerful question that you're asking, because it brings a conversation out that is not talked about enough. We hear that stress is bad, and I've just alluded to this. You know,
Mm-hmm.
chronic stress, when unmanaged, absolutely has an impact on our health, our
Mm-hmm.
brain health, and our physical health. However, there are studies that demonstrate it's not the stress itself, but rather how we think about stress. Therefore, if we see stress as a challenge
Mm-hmm.
rather than a threat, we can really thrive. And that actually is represented when studies have been done where you measure biological markers of stress, like cortisol and something called DHEA. And under circumstances, so there was some studies done by Alia Crum, and maybe about a decade or more ago. And basically what she did was told people they were going to go into an interview, a really stressful interview. And before the interview, some of those people watched a video that showed the positive enhancing effects of stress. When they measured their cortisol levels, those that had watched their video had lower levels of the stress hormone cortisol
Is that because
compared to
they're
those.
prepared?
Because they had this idea that actually stress is a challenge, I'm not going to be scared.
So they
You know, we
prepare
talked
themselves.
there. No, I mean, we
Oh.
talked about the stress response when we did the anxiety podcast, and how, you know, our stress hormones will be released. If you go in thinking, oh my goodness, this is awful, this is going to be dreadful, we are ramping up that stress response. If we go in with this idea of, do you know what, this is going to be a challenge, but I can do it, I'm going to do it,
Mm-hmm.
then the cortisol level is going to come down. And they'll come down to a level that will help us perform rather than try and avoid or run away or avoid stress.
Mm-hmm.
So in answer to your question, One, how we think about stress is important.
Mm-hmm.
Two, the more we avoid stress, the more anxious we become. Three, instead of avoiding it, lean into it and go, okay, what's the worst that can happen? And I'm talking about general stress here, because there are, we've got to remember there's nuance here when we're talking about stress.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes if there's a really big challenge coming in that's going to be we know is going to be stressful, instead of going in scared, go in with a mindset of, you know what? I'm going to learn something from this. I might not succeed, but I'm going to learn. And it's so, I think of all the questions that we've talked about through these series,
Mm-hmm.
that was a really powerful one.
Yeah. It's funny how you mention about how we think about stress, because I'm reading a book called Stop, It's Not Too Late.
Yeah.
And the writer emphasized how important it is about the brain. We actually shape our mind based on how we think and how we approach a situation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you just mentioned the same thing, like based on what we think about, just as the illustration with the interview, you
Yeah.
know. So I think it giving me a different way to look at stress, because honestly, sometimes I'm so stressed I can't even sleep.
And this is the problem. This is unmanaged stress. We need to see stress as enhancing, but we can talk about techniques that actually help with that, with sleep. And, because when I was saying stress is inevitable, it really is. We can't avoid it. Modern day life really is stressful, and more stressful for some than others. Thinking about the carers of people that have dementia, thinking about people that live with ADHD, people who are anxious, their stress levels are through the roof. We can't just teach a positive mindset. We need to actually teach, how do we implement that into day-to-day life?
Um, there's so much question in this podcast, and I do not want to stray too much, but you mentioned about techniques, about sleep, and I would like to find out from you what techniques we could use, because we talk about dementia,
Yeah.
and studies show that people who are sleep deprived have high risk of getting dementia. So sleep is very important, and the fact that we are on the topic of dementia, what kind of techniques we could use to help navigate or help sleep better?
Okay, so the brain really likes routine and structure. Remember, it
Mm-hmm.
likes to save energy, and that's why we create habits.
Right.
Now, habits aren't always a positive thing.
Mm-hmm.
The brain doesn't know that. It knows it's saving energy, so it likes routine. So one of the first things that I would be saying is to write out a sleep hygiene protocol.
Mm-hmm.
This is the time that I am going to let go of my worries of the day. This is the time that I am going to start unwinding. Now,
Mm-hmm.
how unwinding looks for some people may be some self-care, it may be prayer, it may be reading, it may be listening to music, but we need to have, as much as possible, a routine so the brain knows what's coming next.
Mm-hmm.
So we know at a certain time we're going to let go of our worries. If we're struggling with that, journal them. Worrying about our worries is going to keep us awake, and worrying about worries is not normally going to solve a problem. Okay? And sleep is important. Then
Right.
we start our wind down. And if we suddenly remember something, make a note of it. Don't try and hold it in the working memory. We talked about working memory as well. When we try and remember an appointment, or that I need to go to the shop and buy this, don't hold it in the mind.
Mm-hmm.
The mind can't rest.
Right.
So remember, the opposite of stress, the stress response, is rest and
But
digest.
but how do we let it go off the mind though? Because sometimes the mind really working hard.
Oh, yes. And that's where journaling's important, but also mindfulness practice. So when the mind is taking us away, we want to bring ourselves back to the present moment, the here, the now, and we engage our senses. We've got 5 senses. We've got our sight, we've got our hearing, we've got our smell, we've got our taste, and we've got our sense of touch. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're to ground yourself in the present moment, you would actually just bring awareness to all of those things, like in the body, not the mind, in the body, and outside the body. What can you hear? What can you see? Now, when I say not the mind, I'm not talking about ignoring what's going on. In what I'm talking about is not being hijacked by the thoughts.
Right.
Let them be. Let them go. If a thought comes in, right, I must remember I've got that deadline coming up. I need to plan for it. Let it go. Don't hop on the thought train. Come back into the body, connect to breath. Remember, breath is always an anchor.
Mm-hmm.
It's a constant. Connect to your breath. Relax. What can I feel? As I'm sat here now, I can hear my fish tank. I can feel my feet in my slippers touching the floor.
Mm-hmm.
I actually have a blanket on my lap. I can feel the blanket.
Mm-hmm.
I can see lights. I can see my books. And you can see what I'm doing now is coming out of my thoughts,
Right.
out of my ruminating thoughts, all of these worries, and being much more present. That's where, if you were to, for example, say, you could start to sing, you could start to hum, you could recite a poem, you could read a book out loud, read a book silently. Anything that allows you to actually escape those ruminating, tumbling thoughts, because that gives us a break. We can also remind our brain, say, now's time for rest. Rest is important. With the thoughts that you're having, counter them with why it's okay to relax, because the brain doesn't want to let go.
Right.
So now what we're going to do is say, hey, we want to perform really well tomorrow. We've got a busy day tomorrow. Let's focus on our rest. Give yourself permission. Then we also need to think about, because of the dark light cycle that hits the eye, this is part of our internal clock. So when it's light, it's kind of like a reminder to wake up. So you need to try in some way, shape or form dim a room. And that's why often things like blackout blinds can be really good in the summer months, to kind of keep a room dark. Some people have alarms in the morning that gradually start to get brighter and brighter in the darker months to help the signal go to the brain. Actually, now's time to wake up. So that's important in terms of the light. Also, we like the temperature to be slightly cooler of a nighttime. Go into a little bit of hibernation mode. If you're too warm, we all know it's really difficult to sleep. We want it to be cooler, and we can put blankets on. If you're in bed and you're tossing, you're turning, you really can't fall asleep, ideally, one of the recommendations is get back out of bed. Go to a quiet spot. Make sure that the bedroom is associated with sleep. So I would tell people, for example, if there is someone that struggles with sleep and they like to sit in bed eating and watching TV, this is going to contribute. I was saying the brain's got signals. For
Right.
some people, if that's something they do habitually and they're struggling to sleep, walk into the bedroom, brain's going to go, oh, food. So it's about consistency, but it's really important, Brian, that people recognize that just because I'm giving this advice doesn't mean it works for everybody. We need to work out our personalized protocol. Trial it. If it doesn't work, tweak it. Once you've found something that works, stick to it.
I'm in totally in agreement with you, because I can remember some time ago I was struggling with my sleeping as well. And I was doing some research. But as you said, what worked for someone else doesn't necessarily going to work for you. But what worked for me is setting a routine. And 10 o'clock my phone automatically goes off on night mode.
Yeah.
So it forced me to come off the phone.
Yes. Yeah.
And I keep my room dark.
Yeah.
Whatever light I have peeping out, I
Yeah.
just stop using it. And I'm trying journaling now.
Yeah.
I'm trying, but that has worked for me so far. But what worked for me may not work for someone else.
Absolutely. And I think something that's really important, just thinking about with you saying about journaling, one of the things that I can recommend to people that have a busy mind or lots of worries that come in that they find distracting is to allocate a time, an appointment with yourself, and I call it a worry window. It might be 15 minutes, it might be 20 minutes, it doesn't matter. But basically, maybe for some people it's half an hour. But basically, you allow yourself during that appointment to worry as much as you want to worry. Outside of that, when worries come in, what we don't want to do is say to the brain, no, I'm ignoring you, I'm not interested, because obviously the brain's trying to communicate something to us. What we want to say is, okay, I'll come back to that during my worry window. And that's really important is, you know, if something keeps coming up, then we do need to pay attention. However, when we are very stressed, or we're trying to concentrate, you know, if we're very stressed, we won't find a solution. If we're trying to concentrate, we're going to be distracted. So neither the worry or what we're trying to focus on is going to get our full attention.
Right.
Give your worries worry time and allocate a worry window. Make it an appointment. Very often, by the time you get to your allocated worry window, it doesn't feel so important. But you can still sit there, and you know, worry window might be talking out loud, it might actually be asking someone else to just listen, or it can be journaling. And actually, coming back to your point about journaling, I journal, not all the time, but I do journal, and I find thought patterns, and I notice that I'm worrying about things that I have no control over.
Right.
Like other people's behaviors.
Yeah.
Like a deadline. You can't control a deadline. Let's focus on our energy, you know? So identify those things through journaling where you're putting a lot of your efforts, non-judgmentally, where you're putting a lot of your efforts, where actually your mental energy would be better placed in a more proactive space.
Those are some wonderful tips. What do we mean specifically when we talk about brain health, and where does mental health fits in?
Yeah, and I think this is one thing, you can't actually separate the two, but this isn't talked about again enough. Brain health is the physical structure and the function of the brain, the cells, the nervous system. Where mental health is more about our engagement with life, how we experience life, and mood changes. And of course, what's good for mental health is also good for brain health. So we need to be running these things together. So we talked about, for example, you said you'd looked at the research and you're very aware that sleep deprivation, chronic sleep deprivation, maybe insomnia, is a risk factor. Doesn't mean it's going to lead to dementia, but it's a risk factor.
Risk factor.
And that's because it supports the health of the actual brain, not how we engage in life, but the structure and the function of our cells that help us engage, so we can't separate out the two. And sometimes I think maybe we need to just consider what's happening here. Is it my brain health? Is it my mental health? You know, we can try and identify whether or not there's some differences there. Are we having chronic mood fluctuations? Are we feeling hungry? Are we feeling tired? Is this mental health or is this brain health? And that's a question we need to ask ourselves.
Can we actually influence the brain health as we get older?
Absolutely. Consistently. So, for example, even people with mild cognitive decline, so let's say early signs of dementia, can slow the progression of the cognitive decline. Remember, we can't reverse. We can slow the progression, and that is through things like, where possible, walking.
Right.
Studies that have been done, people with mild cognitive decline, walking programs, structured walking programs with advised by professionals, can actually slow the rate of decline. So that actually shows we're influencing the brain. So many lifestyles.
Speaking about lifestyle, what are some powerful habits for brain health?
Okay, so I am going to say some awful habits for brain health. We cannot ignore substance and alcohol abuse. We absolutely know that chronic substance use, chronic alcohol use is really is not good for the brain. Now, I'm not saying people shouldn't drink, okay? This
Mm-hmm.
isn't what I'm saying. I'm talking about misuse. However, let's also think about diet. You know, there are things that we can do. We can talk about that if you want to, about, you know, the positive things that we can do. But also we know that people that eat high levels of processed foods that are maybe metabolically unhealthy, so high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, especially around the midriff, you know, people don't realize or think about the impact on the brain. This has an impact on our brain health as well. So we might be looking at, you know, people say, oh, I need to go on a diet because I've put weight on. People don't say I need to go on a diet because of my brain.
That's so true.
It
Uh,
is.
um, I would like to get into the habits that we could use.
Mhm.
So, what are some healthy habits that we could practice?
Okay, so we let's come back to exercise.
Right.
So we know that, for example, I'm not talking about extreme exercise, but aerobic exercise such as walking, it might be gardening, it might be swimming, it might be cycling, it might be dancing, it might be doing rigorous housework. Okay, so again, it's always about you, it's not about fixed, you must do this, it's about getting the heart rate up, for example. But we also know that in the brain, aerobic exercise produces something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotrophic factor. This is a growth factor. This is a molecule that nourishes and nurtures the health of our neurons, especially those around the hippocampus, which is involved in memory. So nurturing the memory region of our brain, because let's face it, many of us, when we do think about our brain, do worry about losing our memory, for
Right.
example. So exercise, but also we know that exercise is good for many reasons. It produces endorphins, these kind of happy hormones, mood regulators like serotonin, dopamine is neurotransmitters that are great for like motivation, drive, reward, all of these things. So let's just say that exercise, whether it's dancing, like I said, or walking, all of those things we talked about, produce this beautiful cocktail
Mm-hmm.
of happy molecules. So that is in addition to having protective effects on the brain. So that would be exercise. We also need to think about healthy relationships. People don't realize the impact of loneliness
Mm-hmm.
or unhealthy relationships on the brain. Huge, especially when thinking about mental health. But you know, we think about our elderly population that more at risk of cognitive decline, then sat lonely. This is really problematic for the brain. We're social creatures. We're not meant to be on our own. But those relationships we have, we really do need to make sure that they're healthy relationships.
I've seen research that also indicates that people that are living on their own are also at high risk of getting dementia. Is that because they have no communication? They're not challenging their brain? Is that the reason you think?
I think there's probably a number of factors, and I think one, the loneliness would certainly be playing into that. But what you've just said, like the stimulation, no stimulation, mental stimulation, conversing, maybe. I mean, also, what's the diet like of somebody living on their own?
Mm,
That's something to think about.
interesting.
And you know, and if you've got somebody living on their own, dependent on their age, you know, do they have disrupted sleep because of having to get up and use the bathroom multiple times in the night? Maybe like some depression. That impacts, you know, if you're on your own, you're going to have maybe an increased risk of depression. And of course, this is going to have an impact on our diets. Can you see how all of these factors actually interconnect?
I'm actually looking on Genesis 1.
Yeah.
When Genesis 1 or Genesis 2, when God created Eve,
Mm.
in God's mind, he realized that, listen, this man need company. This
Yeah.
man need a companion. So he pulled the rib from Adam and create female and said, no, you have company. And when you mention about, the communication and stuff, I realized God made no mistakes.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's so,
So
we're
we
so
definitely need to be, with one author would say we should challenge our brain.
Yes, absolutely. And I think the other thing is having connections with people around common interests. So coming back to the church, being in an environment where you're with people with the same interests and the same passion, that's really important for brain health as well.
What's
That's
one thing that people think help their brain or doesn't help their brain?
Yes, I am going to go. There's a couple. Now, I'm going to put my hand up first and say I love my coffee. Love my coffee. An over-reliance of coffee isn't necessarily a good thing. And I just want to say that for most people, moderate amount of coffee is actually not harmful.
Right.
And the reason that I'm not talking about the caffeine in and of itself, but how we're masking tiredness,
Mm.
running off things that make us more alert. It's not about what's making us more alert necessarily. It's about the fact we're ignoring our body. We're ignoring the
We're not
signs.
listening when it's time to go to bed.
We need to rest. We have to rest. We keep coming back to this and around sleep and rest. But the other thing is, and we talked about attitude to stress, always thinking positively is not necessarily helpful.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to really clarify that, because when we always have to see the positive only in something, that can set us up for failure.
Right.
Life is bumpy. We need to experience the highs, the lows, and everything in between. We also need to be realistic.
Mm-hmm.
So that's about when we were leaning into stress and treating it as a challenge. It's about being realistic. I might not get this right, but I'm going to learn something from it. So I'm not somebody who thinks necessarily that we should be sat there before doing something we really don't want to do. I'm brave, I'm brave, I'm brave, I'm brave. That doesn't always, the brain doesn't always believe that to be the case. So we don't always have to think positively. Sometimes we can just sit with what is. Just be. That comes back to that mindfulness. Just be. We don't have to pretend.
Mm-hmm.
Just be. Today's just a day.
Definitely.
It's okay to be
Just
sad.
just take it as it is.
Yes, don't force the positivity. That's not what I'm saying. So when we were talking about this kind of this mindset approach, we know that we can use an stress is enhancing, but what we don't want to do is say that that we want to remove stress, or we shouldn't acknowledge that there's stress. It's always about balance.
Yeah. What are some common myths? And what can we do instead?
Okay, so one of the things that we used to think is that the brain was fixed. So by the time that we'd come out of adolescence into our 20s, that was it. Our brain was fixed. We had what we had. Our intellect was what we had. That was it. We now know, and you've already asked the question, the brain actually is quite like malleable. So there's a process called neuroplasticity where we can continue to learn new things.
Mm-hmm.
We can continue to develop skills.
Mm-hmm.
So this is important. The brain is not fixed. You can start learning a new language any point in your life. You can start it when you're 60.
Mm-hmm.
You might not pick it up as quickly as you were in your teens. Some people may, who knows? It's about how much time you've got to allocate and how interested you are. But the brain isn't fixed. Okay.
Goes back to what I said
Learning.
earlier. Challenge the brain.
Challenge the brain
Right.
always.
Right.
Otherwise it just gets stagnant, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing to remember is having challenges with our mental health
Mm-hmm.
doesn't mean our brain is broken.
Mm-hmm.
Our brain is not broken. It means that life has become overwhelming. Now, I'm going to take out mental illness. That sits more with psychiatry. I'm talking about day-to-day stresses and, changes in mood, anxiety, chronic overwhelm, etc.
So the brain is not broken.
It's not broken. It's adapted.
Mm-hmm.
It's adapted in the same way we can adapt it back. That's the
Right.
neuroplasticity. So it's learned to adapt, anxiety, stress because of really challenging life experiences, maybe grief, divorce, financial troubles, job loss, all of these things. And we might go into an anxious state and really struggle to leave the house and have palpitations. This is an adaptation.
Mm-hmm.
We can actually, with things like mindfulness, with things like journaling, creating a safe environment, thinking rationally or more logically, so working on our cognitive thought processes, we can address these. So neuroplasticity works both ways. I
Okay.
also want to challenge this idea that some people are right-brained and the others are left. We know that there are specific functions that might be more dominant on a right or a left-hand brain, but people are not right-brained, right-hand brained, or left-hand. Also, we don't use only 10% of our brain. We use most of it, just not all at the same time.
Yeah, I've always heard that, we only use 10% of our brain.
Right.
I'm like,
Yeah.
then why we have this big brain then? Yeah. If we're only using that 10%, what we doing with the other 90?
Yeah, no, we're fortunately now science has evolved. We can do imaging and scanning and things like that. There's just specific regions and networks that work at specific times, like when we talked about the stress response.
Okay.
So depending on what your experience is, will depend on what part of the brain we need.
Okay. Any other myths in the bag?
Say that again.
Any other myth in the bag?
Not that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay. People in our whole, like, you are an entrepreneur, you're a mother, you are a work at home, you are controlling that business, you are controlling this business. How can help busy people support their brain?
Again, a brilliant
Because you
question.
kind of, when you have so much things coming under one umbrella, it's like you feel pressured.
Absolutely. And again, it comes into this, like with technology now, you can't even escape, can you? You've got messages coming through and reminders and all of these things, and it's really overwhelming. So even if you're focusing on something, you've got this constant background of things that are going on. If you're a mum that's trying to work, you've got all this sensory information that's going into the brain. You can hear the kids, you're trying to focus on your work. It's really, really hard. And I think one of the key things which we alluded to earlier, routine, structure. The brain likes habits. Okay, so for example, we don't think about brushing our teeth, we just do it.
Right.
Okay, we don't think about having a drink, we just do it, for most of us. And it's, and this is really important, that a routine allows the brain to let go of some energy. Okay, because a habit we don't have to consciously think about, we just automatically do it. Okay, this goes for good and bad habits, by the way.
Right.
I say good and bad. I don't like those labels, but those that are either in alignment with our health or they're not.
Yeah.
And so coming back to, for example, brushing our teeth, we do that, it's automated, but very often we'll be brushing our teeth thinking about all the things we need to do. One of the ways we can give the brain a break is by practicing mindfulness.
Right.
And that means the experience of brushing your teeth. What does it feel like? What can I smell? What does the water look like? Is it cold? Immerse yourself in the moment. Mindfulness is good for memory. It's good for our executive functioning, so clarity. It helps. It's just so important that we just simply don't do enough of it. But people think when we talk about mindfulness that it means sitting in a quiet space and meditating for a long period of time. We can mindfully drive to work. We can mindfully walk to work. We can mindfully wash the dishes. We can mindfully talk to our children. So what I mean is engage in what we're doing instead of do what we're doing and thinking about something else at the same time. If you're going to work and you're stressed because you think you're going to be late, I'm going to be late, I don't know what I'm going to do about it, that drive is going too slow. You see how we're ramping up that stress?
Right.
Can't do anything about it.
Yeah. I remember my days driving in Jamaica and I'm rushing to a meeting and the traffic, I'm like, move out the way, move.
You just get so stressed before the
Get
meeting.
stressed before I even reach the meeting, like, and there's nothing I can do about it because I can't overtake
No,
and I can't go any further.
yeah,
Sometimes I used to wish there was this cartoon called Captain Gadget
yes.
where he just used to just transform his gadget into something. So I used to wish that I had one of those car that could just lift up and just go over those cars, you know. Yeah.
I think, you know, the thing that we need to remember is when we are thinking about how stressed we are or
Mhm.
how busy we are, we're stressing about stress.
Yeah.
And that's not helpful. It's really not helpful. And so just be present in the moment. The meeting hasn't arrived yet. Yes, you might be late, but you can't change that. And I think that's where we need to be really more kind of understanding about how our thoughts affect how we feel.
Right.
You know, when we think about, oh my goodness, I'm going to be late, my boss is going to be cross with me, we've got all these stress hormones and panic coming in.
Mm-hmm.
We have, no, you know, there's nothing we can do. So instead, what we can do, if we want to ruminate, if we want to
Mm-hmm.
think about how it's going to feel getting into bed at the end of the day, because that's relaxing. You know,
Relaxing.
when you remember something that's a really happy memory,
Right.
we feel that in the body. Remember a holiday that we had or a really great laugh that we had with a friend.
Mm-hmm.
We feel that in the body. We
Definitely.
feel that in the body. If you're a busy person, have things to look forward to and just have that as your focus. I know that I've got a difficult time at work. We've got these deadlines or these projects coming up, and I can do this. And I've got this break, or I'm going to have this gathering with my friends.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to go to this concert. That's what's going to keep me going. We call that delayed gratification. It's really great for keeping you on track.
Diet.
Mm.
A lot of people using diet to correct so much diseases, so much illnesses. Is there any diet that can nourish our brain and give us a healthy brain?
So there's, remember, biologically, we're all very unique. So there are going to be some people that have intolerances, and there are going to be some people that are going to favor a certain diet over another. What we cannot get away from, because there's no specific diet that stands out for everybody, we cannot get away from the Mediterranean diet
Mm-hmm.
as being really positive and beneficial for health. Really good oils, you know, we know like olive oil, extra virgin olive oil. We know that healthy fats are omega-3s that come from oily fish, for example, nuts, from seeds, rainbow vegetables,
Right.
you know, whole grains. And really, I often think about this idea of colour on our plate. You know, we like the greens, and they are great for us. We need them. We also need the fibre. Fiber's great for, by the way, and a healthy gut microbiome. Now, I've just jumped and I'm excited. So I'm hoping that your listeners will be excited about this. Something that's really important is for us to look after our gut health. And that, so I'm going to be bringing in fermented foods. So this
Right.
can be things like Greek yogurt, kefir, you know, this is sauerkraut, anything that's fermented, because this places healthy, multiple different types of healthy bacteria into the gut.
Mm-hmm.
These have lots of role in relation to health, including communicating with the immune system. And the gut-brain axis is particularly important. So a healthy gut is going to contribute to a healthy brain. And if the brain's not healthy, then we do often see IBS-like symptoms in the gut. So we do need to take care of our gut. So I'm going to mention those fermented foods because they have probiotic potential. Really important. Lean meats, brilliant. And if you're going to have things like maybe cheese or red meats, then just more in moderation.
Right.
The Mediterranean diet, you know, if anybody hasn't had a look at it, explore it. Look at, you know, what a Mediterranean diet looks like. And it can, it's a way that I like to eat. I might improvise at times, but it's a way that that I like to eat. The idea really, when we're thinking about our health, is to minimize added sugars where possible.
Okay.
Minimize added sugars where possible. Used to be, you know, we used to have a lot of fear around fats, healthy fats, you know, avocado, nuts, seeds, our olive oil. I brought back some extra virgin olive oil from Greece. You can't beat buying it in the
Yeah.
Mediterranean, you
They
know.
said that Greece have the best extra virgin olive oil.
Oh, it's delicious.
I
It's
need to get I
delicious.
need to get me some.
Yeah, no, I always we were in Mallorca and I picked some up as well. I always like to bring it home. And I think the thing with extra virgin olive oil is to always make sure that it's in a dark bottle.
Yeah. Mine's the ones that I bought is in dark bottle. Because that's what I use as well. In the podcast, I think it was in anxiety or ADHD, you spoke about walnuts as well, how it's beneficial to the brain.
Yeah,
Yeah,
love
so I
them.
think we could
Absolutely.
incorporate that as well into our diet.
Yeah,
Um,
definitely. Also, Brazil nuts, they contain selenium, and selenium's an antioxidant.
I love
So
Brazilian nuts as well.
yeah, so one or two of those, we have to be careful. One or two of those a day, I think, if I'm correct, actually meet our daily requirements for
Yeah.
selenium, which is a powerful antioxidant.
Every time I order, because I'm trying this online shopping with Asda, but every time I try, every time I'm trying to order Brazil nuts, I can't get any.
Really?
Can't get any.
Okay,
Very
so
rare. Very
yeah,
rare.
that's
Um,
interesting because I think I bought them from our local one.
yeah, very rare. I get them from off Asda. You mentioned about alcohol earlier, and I'm sure this is going to be in line with my next question. But are there any bad habits that we can develop that will decline our brain?
Yeah, and alcohol, there's actually an alcohol-induced dementia. And it's really coming from chronic binge drinking of
Mm-hmm.
alcohol. I'm going to be very honest, it's not something that I've studied
Mm-hmm.
extensively, so I can't give you a lot of
Right.
information about that.
Right.
However, I was in clinic with a psychiatrist and he did have a patient, a young-ish patient, and they'd done the scan and they actually had atrophy, so shrinkage of the brain, and that was attributed to alcohol misuse. So yeah, it's a very real
So can you emphasize then on any habits that we can do apart from alcohol that will help decline our brain?
So help improve our brain would be, for example, you know, if people stay within the recommended units for the country that you're in, absolutely. There is some idea that red wine, in moderation, again, this is coming from the Mediterranean diet, may have some phytochemicals, I think they're polyphenols, that may have some benefits in the same way as dark chocolate. But again, in moderation, always in moderation. And you know that I think the key message always, you know, to be honest, Brian, comes back to balance.
The Bible spoke about in everything we should be temperance.
Yeah, yeah.
So someone said to me some years ago that, do you know what the Bible, the Bible means? And I was like, no. And it's like basic information before leaving Earth. And I was like, interesting. And that brings back my memory now when you mention about it's just moderation.
Yeah,
And I just
yeah.
remember there's a scripture. I can't tell you where the scripture is from, but there's a scripture in the Bible that state that in everything we should be temperate.
Can you share that with me when you find it?
I could. So it is so ironic that science is telling us these things, and the Bible been telling us these things ages ago before even science. So yeah. Um, Last week we were on the topic of dementia,
Hmm.
and we talked so much stuff about dementia. And you mentioned about the protein in the
Hmm.
brain
Hmm.
that I think it was decline that cause contribute to dementia.
Yeah.
So my question is, what can we do to prevent the protein in our brain to decline?
Okay, so the proteins are present in the brain already, and then they start to form aggregates. What we don't know is what tips them in favor of that, but lifestyle can contribute.
Right.
That means we are talking about all of the things that we've discussed: sleep, exercise, diet, continued learning, good, healthy connections,
Mm-hmm.
contribution in life, meaningful life. So this, and that this is enhancing our mental wellness. And
Right.
so that's going to have an impact on our brain health as well. So it's about looking at, and this is the best piece of advice I can give, because we cannot determine whether those proteins are going to become abnormal.
Right.
Okay. But what we can do is look at those aspects of our life where maybe we can tweak. It doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be perfect, because let's face it, striving for perfection is incredibly hard and unachievable.
Right.
But look at those areas in our life where we can make some changes, because those cumulative effects, they
Mm-hmm.
add up.
Mm-hmm.
They start to add up, and just be realistic in expectations. If you, for example, you're not exercising, and we know that exercise is good
It's
for the brain,
important. Yeah.
then we need to say, okay, well, from now on, what I'm going to plan to do within mobility, within reason, mobility, etc. I'm going to do a dance in the kitchen for 5 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm going to build on that. And it may be that we start to say, okay, well, when I'm hoovering, I'm going to be extra vigorous with the
Right.
hoover. Or I'm going to take an interest in the garden. Maybe instead of having someone come in, if you have someone that mows the lawn, do it yourself. All of these things, but maybe join groups, a community centre where there's activities going on.
Right.
We're much more motivated to do things when other people are with us.
True.
So, become accountable as well. Tell someone, like, this is what I'm going to do. Can we buddy up, or can I be accountable to you and check in when I've done these things? So there's lots of different ways, but we need to look at what areas we need to make change. If our diet is not looking great, and then say, okay, what do I want to do? I want to introduce more oily fish. Okay, well, I'm going to introduce that once a week. Once a
Mm-hmm.
week, I'm going to meal plan, and I'm going to introduce that. Because what we do with that is we start to build momentum. The brain likes it when we go, wow, yeah, I did really well.
Mm-hmm.
Small wins, they add up. You
Definitely.
start going out and meeting people and going for a walk, you're going to miss it if you don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and tick as many boxes as possible. So, like, if, for example, we talked about healthy relationships, connectivity, this
Mm-hmm.
sort of thing. So do an exercise with other people in nature,
Right.
if possible.
Right.
Tick the boxes. So it's
Right.
about, honestly, Brian, it's about being really honest with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
And, what changes would I like to make? But we don't have to do it all in one go. We don't have to do it all in one go.
Dr. Tracy, I've enjoyed these series. And this one of the benefit with this podcast, I'm learning as I'm going on. And I've learned so much in this series, and I'm encouraging my listeners, even persons that just come across this video, to watch all 4 series, because you can't watch one series and you get where we're coming from. and we have spoke about so much habits that can help the brain.
Yeah.
Thank you for this series, and I wish you all the best. You are a neuroscience and you do one-to-one coaching. How can people connect with you, follow your social media, or book a session?
So I don't know whether you have the ability to have a link to my website on your podcast
Yeah,
underneath.
I'll put it
Maybe that
underneath
would be
description.
the thing. And also to say it's really important that your listeners understand that the advice that we've given is doesn't replace that of their own doctor, and that's
Definitely.
important. It's complementary. But if you are willing, I wanted to share a quote with you and your listeners.
Appreciate.
And it's basically, we were talking about how we approach stress is really important. And I don't know whether you've heard of Viktor Frankl. He wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and he was a Holocaust survivor. He was a psychiatrist, a neurologist, a philosopher like me. And he also survived concentration camps. So he saw the worst possible experiences
Okay.
and he did a series of lectures afterwards, and there was something that he said, and I think it's really powerful, and hopefully your listeners will find it powerful as well, because we always have choice around how we approach something. And what he says is, everything can be taken from man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. And I think that's really powerful.
It is.
You would like to share that,
You could send me so I could place it in the description box. If you have been following this series, let us know in the comment section. What have you learned and what could you do differently? And to my regular listeners,
Until next time, stay safe, stay blessed, and eat healthy.